Thank you, Mariah.
Very good. Thank you. Again, thank you all for attending. And again, thanks to the task force for the precious gift of your time and your attention. And we are today hearing on use of force within our police department and sheriff's department, and also the training that goes along with that. And I encourage us again, as always, to please, take notes, gather your thoughts. And as we move further down into later meetings of the task force, I think our questions will sharpen and we'll be able to come back and have some more follow-up questions as we get a broader and deeper understanding of really the whole set of issues that we're working with. Mr. Johnson, any comments or thoughts? And I'm going to pass this on to you if you don't mind.
Thank you, Mayor. I totally agree. I think last week was a very informative session, and we look forward to even greater participation as we get the word out. I'm also looking forward to showing persons how they can navigate through our system to be able to get their stories out. And so far, so good. I look forward to the discussion tonight with the chief and the major and the sheriff. And I guess with that, I'll just maybe do quick introductions of everyone. I see at the top of my screen, Ureli, maybe you'll again give your name and who you're affiliated with, and we'll go around with everyone else.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ureli Castor. I recently, I'm going to graduate from Donnelly College this Saturday. Outside of that, I'll continue my education at Rockhurst, and I work part-time as a business apprentice at Cerner. Thank you.
Monsignor?
I'm Monsignor Stuart Swetland. I'm the 7th president of Donnelly College.
Wonderful. Mr. Smart?
Hello, my name is Curtis Smart. I recently graduated with my master's in public health administration from the University of Kansas Health System, and I am currently a physician recruiter here in Kansas City, Kansas.
Great. Reverend Carter? You need to turn your mic on, sir. I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, Pastor Tony Carter, pastor of the Salem Baptist Church, Kansas City, Kansas.
Oh, thank you. Dr. Hill?
Evelyn Hill. I'm with Avenue of Life, and my new title here is now Equity and Justice Director. Thank you.
Gordon?
Good afternoon. Gordon Criswell, Assistant County Administrator with the Unified Government.
Great. Thank you. Oh, Abby just joined us. Abby, can you just quickly introduce yourself? We're going to be turning it over to you after a while, but just quickly introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Abby Ecker. I work for the Knowledge Department, the Performance and Innovation team. So I built the community engagement tool we're going to be using.
Great. I see Dave Reno and I see Anna Quimby. Dave?
Hi, Commissioner Dave Reno. I'm the Unified Government's interim public information officer. I'm the one that started the live stream today, but Abby is our in-house pro, so I'm going to let her walk through everything with you and hang tight.
Okay, great. Abby? Anna, I'm sorry. Anna? I'm sorry.
Hi, I am Anna Quimby, Executive Assistant to Mayor David Alvey, and I am the host of your meeting today.
All right, I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor, for further directives.
Well, thank you. As you know, we have been putting together a website and an email site so that folks can access and provide us with, among other things, their own stories of policing and difficulties, frictions, problems in our policies, in our training. What we want to know from people is their own personal experiences. That helps us identify. Perhaps we can identify some patterns. Perhaps we can identify some specific needs. We've already heard, for instance, Sheriff Ash identify, I thought, a very important need that there needs to be ongoing evaluation of some of our law enforcement, simply because they experience so much traumatic, have so many experienced so many traumatic events that it does have an effect on them, and to be able to continually to monitor them, to provide them with any help they might need. I thought that was a very good suggestion. And so those are the kinds of things I think that we hope to hear when people present their own stories to us, that we could then share. Some of them might be shared publicly, some probably may not, based upon individual preference. But what we're having is a difficulty for people understanding, first of all, that this is available to them, that they can share their story with us. But we've created multiple avenues for that to happen. And Abby has really been the one who's developed this website and the links, and she's going to walk for anybody who would like to be able to access. She's going to show us how we can access this.
I'm just trying to think of the times that, you know, like we our docs in touch with you.
And so I think I'll pass this on to Abby at this time.
Establish they're in touch with you a bit less, but like how often would you say you interact with Dr. Spetler or Dr. Dawes or Dr. Greenwood?
And so we're getting other kinds of communications. So I just ask everyone to please check to make sure they don't have their, make sure they have their microphone on mute.
Everybody that's not talking, need to mute your phones if possible. Mute yourself somehow.
Excellent. Abby, we're ready to hear.
Perfect. Can you see my screen with our UG webpage? Perfect. Okay. So if you go to right here at the middle of the webpage, we have our UG WICO task force. We have this icon right here in our carousel. Let's see. Okay. And so we have a little bit of information here on the task force page. So all the information about the meeting should be here in the tabs. So I think you have Zoom information. There should be more information on dates. I think we also had a few videos. So really all of the information for the task page, we have a website team with our Department of Technology Services that is making sure that everything is updated. But so for anyone who wants to share, so you're able to share, let's see, perfect. Okay, so if you wanted to go ahead and share your story, you would be able to go to, you'd either use this URL, which is shareable by social media. You can send it in an email, really any way that you would share just any other normal URL. Or you can go straight to that button on the page. This is going to take you through all of the information that you need to know before you share your story. So this page is going to talk to you a little bit about the Kansas Open Records Act and what that means, any information you put in here and what that, you know, how that applies to you. Anyone who wishes to apply their information directly to the task force, that email address where they can send that is right here. So you can send anything to the task force and that goes directly to their inbox. Here's some more information about the task force. So a couple of other ways that submissions can be sent in. Couple of different ways. Let's see, you can mail in. We also have a couple of drop boxes as well. So you can send in a video. You can also send in, if you wanted to do a Word document, we have a couple places in the form where that can be done as well. Let's see. So here's more information about the task force. that email address again. And then just a few things to remember before you go ahead and share any information with us. So once you're ready to go, you would just click I understand and continue forward. So the form is going to ask you what exactly you're coming to share with us. So if you want to share information about an encounter with the task force, you would click that. And then the form is going to ask you some information about that encounter. So this is a situational thing. You would want to go ahead and just tell us about that encounter. I'm of course going to put test, that way we know that it's me messing with the form. So once you go through the form, this is all something that you can do off of the phone, an iPad, any sort of a tablet or your web browser. And so when I get done filling in all of this information, so I should be able to, let's say I want to stop where I'm at, I'm not exactly ready to submit, it's okay, I can save this, and it's going to send me an email with everything I just did. That's totally fine. If I want to go ahead and proceed, I can just click cancel. It'll take me right back where I was. Let's say I want to put in a video, that's fine too. I can select a file, drag and drop, and I can place that file in that Dropbox. So let's say I want to go back though. Let's say instead of an encounter, I wanted to share about an opinion. So that's fine. So what I would do is just rather than go through that prompt, I would just share my opinion right in that text box. So everything is right there and good to go. So this will take 3 files. So you can upload pretty much any normal file. I'm not aware of any, I'm actually not aware of any mainstream file that this won't take, so you should be okay. And then once you're ready, you're just going to click continue. You'll get this message that we received everything. You get to do the awesome, annoying questions, letting it know you're not a robot. And if I'm on par today, I'll have to do this 50 times. And then you should be good. So once you get this submission complete, that's when you know that we've got your submission. The task force gets an email letting us know that everything was received. So you should be good to go. What questions can I answer?
Abby, is there a simple way that we could record what you just did, so that would be there'd be a video instruction someone could click on to open this up, and you could navigate that through for them? Just record that for them?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we can do that over Zoom.
Okay. I think that might be helpful if people say, watch video how to tell your story. It might be a helpful thing. Just a brief, how to do it.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that. And then let me pull up. So I think we talked last time about, adding another button if you needed it. So we were able to, I don't have the mock-up with me, but we were able to add another button. It would just be side by side. So we can do that. What we would do is we would probably just add another link, like here's a how-to video. We have plenty of space underneath that, so you could just do the how-to right there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any other questions from the task force?
Brother Johnson, this is Pastor Carter. I have a question. What what are the protocols for the chain of custody for the video recordings? I mean, the handling of the evidence is crucial to any proceeding which might come from that. So how will that be handled? What would be our approach for that? Abby?
So on my end, the video recordings would just show up. So if I go to, so if I go back to where we were looking at the responses, that's where all the videos would show up. But also, so when you, the task force, gets that email from the respondent, you get that video straight to that email. So as far as chain of custody goes, there's really no way that can be manipulated.
So everybody would have access to it once it comes in. I mean, on the task force, everybody in the task force will have access to it.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
That's an excellent question. I hadn't thought of that.
I don't have a question. I do have a quick comment, and that is the community, I think, just needs to know if they do not feel like writing, all they have to do is just make the quick video and upload it. So I think that's worth knowing.
Yeah, and and I'll go back and I'll show you the video version. Yeah, so here I'll have to show you guys what a video response would look like. So if somebody sent in a video submission, basically you would have one of these responses, but the file would show up here. But if you received it in the form of an email, you would have that as an attachment. No different than if you received like a like if you received like an MP4 attachment. So I will go back to the one I wanted to show you. So this is the video story. So like we talked about last week, so this is, I mean, kind of a little bit different. I mean, all of the same verbiage is the same. And so you would proceed forward, and then, so rather than go through the questions, it's just asking, is this about an encounter, an opinion, or both? And then, so you would just put in you would just basically upload your video rather than answer any questions. So this is just making the assumption that if you're there to upload a video, you're probably not adding any sort of written commentary with it.
Reverend, did that answer your question? Reverend Carter, did that answer your question?
I'm sorry. Yes, Commissioner, it did. Thank you very much, Abby.
Great. Any other questions or comments?
Yes,
Okay.
I have a question. Well, not on this, but on Abby, how is it going with the whole translating it to Spanish? How's that going?
So that is actually, so I tried getting that done today. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a translator freed up today. So hopefully by tomorrow. But definitely on the top of our list of things to get done.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I just wanted to see how that was going.
But actually, while we're discussing that, that was something I wanted to talk to you about. So just in terms of aesthetics. So while we're waiting to get the versions translated, so if we were just to stick with the one form, that's an easy aesthetic question, because I think you would probably just want, like, if this is the English version, you would have the Spanish version go right next to it. If you were to have two forms, what I think you could probably do is have the English version, the Spanish version, and then Form 2, English version of Form 2, and then the Spanish version of Form 2. That's what Irene is telling me looks the best on her end. So far, does that sound okay, or do you guys have any different requests?
I think that would be good. It makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, if there's no more questions, I'll turn it back over to the mayor.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks, Abby. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Commissioner. All right, we'll now move to just some presentation on use of force policies and the training that accompanies that. I think this is going to be very helpful for us to see what goes on in the process. You know, it's to hear what is involved in this, and it'll be interesting to hear again when we begin to receive testimonials from folks how that is played out in practice. So, Chief York.
All right, Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay, great.
sir.
So let me share my screen here real quick. Can people see the screen? Yes? Okay, great. Okay, so before I get started, let me, I have George Sims here today. He is a major with the police department. He has been on for over 25 years, and he has been our expert use of force officer. And basically, he trains our recruits along with other commanders on the application of the use of force. He has testified in court numerous times, explaining why the officers had to use a certain type of force. He also trains other agencies in our use of force, as well as he trains the National Guard. So I brought him in here today because he can explain our use of force, how we do it, why we do it, much better than I can. And he is our resident expert. So I'm gonna mention a few things, and then I'm gonna let him take over. If you guys remember last week, I went into pretty detailed description of what we do in the academy with our new recruits when it comes to talking with people, talking with citizens. As you can see, there's about 50 hours that we train our recruits on just talking with people when they come across them by, you know, we use de-escalation techniques. We do active listening, we slow things down. So all this training that we do is the hopes that we will not have to use any type of force. And I will tell you, as the presentation goes on, you're going to see that we rarely use force. So let me go to the first slide here, second slide. So the reasons why we use force, about 90% of the time, is to effect an arrest. Someone is not complying with an arrest, and we have to use force to get them into custody. A lot of times it will be to prevent an escape. That happens every now and then when a person is arrested and they try to escape. We have to use force to make sure that they don't escape and that we can safely secure them in the police car. To defend ourselves, that happens where we are attacked and we have to defend ourselves. A lot of times is when we have to defend another person. There's a domestic disturbance, for an example, and a person is being battered. We would have to engage and arrest that person, and sometimes have to use force, but we are helping that person, and we are, hoping that our use of force will be minimal and that that person be in custody quickly. So some of this force that we do use is non-criminal use of force. That happens when someone is in mental crisis, or they're under the influence of alcohol or drugs, and they are a danger to themselves or others. There are occasions that we encounter where a person is, like I said, in some type of mental crisis, and they're either going to hurt themselves or hurt someone else. And if we cannot talk to them and we cannot reason with them, our last resort would be to use some type of force to get them in custody so we can get them some help. So the basic rules of a police force. Use force only for lawful purposes. A person has to be committing a crime, and they have to be told that they're under arrest. And if they refuse to comply, then we have to obviously effect that arrest, and that we would have to use force. So the second point would be never for retribution or punishment. If a person is just not cooperating with us, but has not committed a crime and is just being difficult and is being loud and expressing themselves, that person is not under arrest, and we cannot use force because we don't like the way this person is talking to us. So we can never arrest somebody just because of their voice and of what they're saying to us. So do not unnecessarily place an innocent person's safety at risk. If an officer is trying to effect arrest and that person runs from the officer, that officer cannot push someone aside to get to that suspect. We cannot put someone in harm's way because we're trying to get to a suspect. So one example would be the use of deadly force. So when an officer decides that he has to use deadly force, he has to make sure that he knows what his background is beyond the suspect, because we cannot put an innocent person in jeopardy when we are using deadly force. And force must be necessary to be lawful. Again, going back to a person who's just voicing their concern with the police or is upset with how we do things, we are here to listen and not to pass judgment on somebody because they don't particularly like the police. So you can be disorderly against the police. If you're upset with them and you're and they're ranting and raving and using curse words towards the police, well, we have to take it, we have to accept it, and we have to move on. All right, so let me give you some numbers here. And you can look at these. So we can look at 2019. We had 207,000 calls for service. That's everything that we do. 911, car stops, building checks, follow-up on crimes. So it would be over 200,000 calls for service that we went to in 2019. Of all those calls, we only made 7,754 arrests. Okay, so that would tell you most of the things that we do day in and day out do not really involve arrest. We do a lot of patrol activities. We do a lot of community engagement. We do a lot of report writing. We do checking the welfare on people. We do civil standbys. Those are just a few examples of what we do. A small percentage of what we do involves arrest. So of all those arrests in 2019, we had 257 use of force incidents where we had to apply force to effect the arrest. So if you can look at that down below there, 3.7% of all the calls for service involves an arrest. Very small amount. And 3.3 of those arrests involve a use of force.
Just to be clear, Chief, go back if you
Yep.
would.
Yes.
So of the calls for service, 3.7% involved in arrest, and 3% of the arrest with use of force. So just 1/30 of the arrest involved use of force.
Yep, Mayor, I think you're right. You cut out a little bit. I had a hard
Oh.
time understanding you at first there, but I think you're on the right track.
Okay, I see
What you're
it.
saying.
Percent of arrests with use of force. Of all the arrests, 3.3% of those involved a use of force. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Out of the
that
7,000 arrests, out of the 7,754 arrests, we had to use force 3% of the time.
Okay.
Okay,
Chief,
so, yes,
I'm
sir.
sorry.
Yes,
This
sir.
is Reverend Carter. I was just thinking, of those 3.3%, would you have any information related to how many of those might have been considered excessive use of force? Because I think all of us realize that there are opportunities, or there are times when the use of force is very much so appropriate. I think what our concern more so is when that force is either unnecessary or excessive, or as you said with the case, somebody didn't like the way somebody talked to them or something, those kind of things.
So, Reverend, I don't have that information, but I can easily get it for you because we track our internal affairs complaints, and we would know how many people came in and said that the officers used excessive force. I can get that to you pretty quickly.
Okay, I think that would be more relevant information for us.
Okay.
This is good. I think we need to see this as well, because we need to have a good perspective as to how often this happens. But at the same time, I think what we're really more concerned with as far as community and policing is when that force is excessive or unnecessary.
I agree. I'll get
Yes,
that information for you.
Yes, and thank you, Reverend Carter. And of those that maybe reported or they filed a complaint, there was an excessive use of force, that number, but then also those that internal affairs, whoever reviewed that would say that was, that they would verify that that was an excessive use of force. So break that down for us as well.
Will do.
Thank you.
Captain York, just another quick question in that same line of questioning. How many have actually died while you all were arresting them?
Let me, I don't, Dr. Hill, I don't have that information, but again, that's something I could get it very quickly. I may have that information. Okay, so I'm providing this next slide here. In 2019, we had 4 incidents involving lethal force. So out of those 4, I'm not sure how many have died, but we had 4 where the officer used his weapon, his handgun. So to look at this slide some more, these are the levels of control that we use. As you guys can see, verbal direction is part of that. Just giving a person verbal direction will stop a lot of escalation. So if you look at it this way, when it comes to verbal direction, we had over 7,000 arrests, right? And we only had about 200 and we had 7,754 arrests. That means we told that many people, put your hands behind your back, you're under arrest. Out of all that, only 257 resisted us. So 7,500 arrests ended up in verbal direction. So if verbal direction doesn't work, we go with an empty hand control, which is a basically it's muscling techniques. We use pressure points. When it comes to empty hand control, we can do leg strikes. When it comes to that type of muscling and empty hand control, as you can see there, by looking at the numbers, the bulk of our use of force is basically muscling. Now, intermediate weapon there, that is a baton, a taser, and OC spray. We only used our intermediate weapon 19 times in 2019. Now, to give you some clarification on active pointing, that means that the officer felt like his life was being threatened, pulled his handgun, and pointed at the suspect, at which time the suspect either dropped his weapon, dropped his knife, or showed them his hands, but did not shoot. So active pointing would be, we feel like our life is in danger, we point our pistol at the suspect, and the suspect complies. And 4 times we had to actually use lethal force after active pointing. Any questions on how this works? I know these are a lot of numbers, but officers can go from verbal direction if that doesn't work, and they can try to get the person into custody by just using muscling or a leg strike. If they can't do it that way, they go to an intermediate weapon, which would be, again, I said, a taser, a baton, or mace. And by that time, that person would be in custody.
Could you describe again what active pointing is? Is that active pointing of a taser or of a gun or of a pepper spray, whatever it might be?
Okay, great. Yeah, absolutely, Mayor. Active pointing is taking your pistol out of your holster because you feel like you are going to, your life's in jeopardy or someone else's life's in jeopardy. So you point your gun, you give loud verbal commands, and at that point, the suspect either drops his gun, drops his knife, stops what he is doing, and then he's taken into custody. So active pointing is just that. You have pointed your pistol, your handgun, or your rifle at the suspect. Does that answer your question, Mayor?
Yes. And so I guess the next question is do we track statistics for, is there, for how many, for instance, out of the 35 incidents where there was active pointing of a weapon, how many officers was that? In other words, you can see where the danger would be if you've got someone who accounts for 20, did it 7 times, right? Is that monitored, and is that part of the supervision and intervention, or just in general training?
Okay, so when an officer, so that happened 35 times in 2019. That could have been 3 officers doing it. That's not incidents, that's officers that did that. So 4 officers could be 1 incident. So, and it's normally not just 1 officer, it's usually multiple officers that have active pointing in 1 incident. So you're asking me, how many times did Mike York point his pistol at somebody?
Right.
For the course of a year. We do not track that currently, but we have this new internal affairs program that will be tracking that.
Okay, so this active pointing, so there were 35 officers who had to actively point their weapon, but that might have been just 7 different incidents, and 5 different people there showed up, and they all had to draw their weapons, or all drew their weapons. And so that's really how many officers actually drew their weapon. Not right. Okay, I got you.
So to answer your question, Dr. Hill, I have that information now. We shot 4 people in 2019, 2 of them died. And we had no use of force complaints in 2019.
Okay.
So no one
Captain-
came to internal affairs and said the officer treating me, excessively, used force excessively. We did not have any complaints in 19 like that.
Okay. One other question in that same line. George Floyd, I think when he was killed, I think his death would have been under muscling, maybe. It wouldn't have been considered lethal force. Am I correct? And I admit I just don't know.
Right, and that's I understand your question, but our policy would never allow someone to put their knee on a person's neck, because that obviously is lethal force since Mr. Floyd died. So that's something that we do not train and that we do not do. But I hear what you're saying. When it comes to muscling, you have to get them down on the ground and get them handcuffed. So that takes muscling. But once they're on the ground, putting your knee on someone's neck is not allowed here in Kansas City, Kansas.
Okay.
Chief, let me ask this question. I'm just kind of fleshing this out as best I can, because I'm probably the neophyte. But once you got that person down, I lost my train of thought that quick. But once you got that, you've wrestled that person to the ground by muscling or whatever, is de-escalation still occurs? Hey, you might as well quit wrestling. Everything's okay now. We're gonna get you and put you. I mean, do they still continue to try to de-escalate the situation?
Through the entire time, Reverend, the officer was saying, stop resisting, put your hands behind your back.
Yes.
So through the entire time until they get them handcuffed, they are giving loud verbal commands, letting that person know that he or she needs to put their hands behind their back and stop resisting arrest.
And once the handcuffs is on the person and you got them down, for the most part, what would be in Kansas? What would the next step after the guy down? Handcuffs are on him. You got 2 or 3 other officers assisting you. What would be the next step from there?
If that person is handcuffed and he's no longer resisting, no longer kicking, we get him up and have him sit up, or we get him up, have him walking to the car. So it's pretty much immediate. As long as they're not kicking and spitting and things like that, we can get them up, have them sit on their bottom, and from there get them up and get them in the police car.
Okay, great.
Chief, in terms of the data that is being collected, I'm assuming, and maybe you can walk us through the process of compiling this information. Are there reports that are received per incident, per officer that will help you all to comprise this information? Just kind of wanted, and then also, is there a way of verifying and/or confirming what has been applied with it, if in fact there are reports, assuming that's the case? I don't know that.
Sure.
But is there a way to verify and confirm the actions that have been presented to you all in some kind of fashion or other?
Yes. So, Commissioner, this is what would happen. If I have to use force, the supervisor is immediately notified. That supervisor responds to the scene. He interviews all that are involved. He interviews witnesses. He'll interview the person that was arrested and asking them what type of force was used. Was it excessive? Things like that. They conduct their own investigation. The supervisors will. The officers will go back, write their reports, and then that will get forwarded to that supervisor who has already done his investigation. He'll review the officer's reports, make sure that coincides with the investigation, and then the captain of that shift will review the supervisor's report, who he has to make a report as well about his investigation along with the officer's report. Once the captain signs off on it, it gets sent to the use of force coordinator, George Sims. He reviews it to make sure everything is within policy. So there's several mechanisms that are in place to make sure that the officers did it right. Does that answer your question? Commissioner, I think you're muted.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yeah.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And I was sounding so eloquent. Now, hopefully I can remember what I just said. But I'm just kind of putting on the role of devil's advocate in the sense of this is going through basically 3 to 4 chains of command, or 3 chains of command. I suppose that if there was something that was done untoward, that was out of policy, I don't know. I'm just trying to figure. I'm thinking about what somebody would say to me. You know, a community person might say to me. You know, everybody, they're just covering each other's back basically by going through these steps. Is there anything that you could say that would speak to that in any kind of form or fashion?
You know, Commissioner, the only thing that comes to mind, and I think that and I hope this is the answer, is the body-worn camera. I mean, each one of our officers will have a body-worn camera, and that's going to show what happened. And, you know, I'll tell you this, when the supervisor goes out there and interviews the suspect, there are multiple times where he says, yeah, I resisted arrest and this is how I did it. So, I mean, I know that for sake of transparency, we, you know, maybe that doesn't make sense to the community, but, you know, I will tell you that our sergeants and our captains and the use of force coordinator, there's those different levels that when officers make mistakes, they're held accountable when it comes to our use of force policy. But I understand what you're saying, and I really think the answer is the body-worn camera.
Yeah, yeah.
Commissioner, this is Sheriff Ash. I would just add, and I know Chief mentioned the body worn, but even now there's some in-car camera probably that's available that becomes part of the review, and or interviewing any other witnesses, you know, that were there that are not police officers, if you will, is a part of that supervisor's response and review.
Okay.
That's true. That's a good point, Sheriff Ash. Yes, the supervisor, I made mention of that, would interview the people in the car, the people in the house that were not part of the arrest.
Great. Okay. Thank you both.
Chief, you mentioned a new program, internal affairs tracking, or I forgot what you named it. Could you just describe briefly what other kind of stats? So for instance, I'm assuming that race and ethnicity would be also tracked in terms of the stats on these incidents?
Yes, Mayor, it would be, they would track officer complaints, track officer uses of force, track officers' sick days, officers' accidents, all the things that we do day in and day out. And if it becomes a pattern where there's a lot of, you know, if there's 3 complaints within, I believe it's 90 days, then that officer will be flagged, and we'll begin an investigation on that. So there are multiple things that this new IA Pro system can track. And part of that would be, you know, what types of force is he using? How many times he's pulled out his weapon and pointed it at somebody? So our system now is pretty dated, and this will, you know, we'll be moved in the right direction with this new system. and be able to track our officers' conduct. So, for example, currently right now, when an officer gets disciplined at the station and the sergeant or the captain would discipline that officer, internal affairs really isn't aware of that. So this will be this IA Pro will be, can't think of the word for it, but a gathering place for all the officers and everything that they do. So we'll be able to see how many times he was disciplined over the course of a year, see what's going on with him when it comes to, like I said, sick time, being tardy, all these little indicators that something's going on with this officer.
Yeah, and we can actually help set those parameters, Mayor, Commissioner, and task force members, like Chief said. So if you wanted to flag at 3 attitude and conduct complaints within a 60-day period, for example, you want to know what's going on with this officer or whatever, or a couple of uses of force. So many, if they are involved in acting, pointing so many times. The administrators or the leaders, the command, we can kind of help set those red flags, if you will. And when that number is reached, then the system notifies the appropriate commander, whatever, to say, heads up, Deputy Pump Handle here has now raised a red flag on attitude and conduct complaints, or whatever the case may be. It's going to be a huge help in tracking anybody that may have a propensity, to be involved. There might be smoke. We need to check and see if there's fire.
Yeah, I understand. That makes really good sense. And so again, you can set the parameters. So I could understand where, for instance, if you had 3 incidents in a 90-day period, there might be something that the law enforcement officer is experiencing in an acute way, but that there might be also a parameter where you would say, well, it's 3 incidents over 3 years, and there's something that is triggered to that individual at different times, and it doesn't happen very often, but it still needs to be addressed. And I go back to your suggestion that we need to continue to provide that evaluation of our law enforcement officers to be able to identify any problems and to give them the support that they need and provide the correction as needed. So it's all about care. It's about caring for the community and caring for our officers who are in a position of caring for the community. So again, those parameters, I suppose, would be guided by research in law enforcement about what are those, what's the bell curve? When do you, how do you set those parameters is guided by research in law enforcement, and how do you care for your officers and prevent, major problems.
That's actually it, Mayor. We've got IACP, we've got PERF. They've done those studies. There's good best practices out there to help guide us in those decisions and things as chief executive officers and senior command level people. An IA Pro sets off a flag. Now Major Sims or our use of force coordinators can get back into the weeds of those reports that Commissioner Johnson was asking about. And we can look and see, are we seeing that in the reports? Did we miss something in a review or something there? It just helps us in furtherance of that overall goal of taking care of the officers, being sure they are fit for duty appropriately. And if we take care of the officers take care of the community appropriately. And hopefully our community reciprocates and helps take care of our officers appropriately as well.
So, Mayor, yeah, what Sheriff Ash is saying is, right on target. We've talked about this in the past, but we do have a full-time wellness officer who's assigned to my office, and they are going out to calls for service that are traumatic events, talking to the officers, gauging to see how they're dealing with what they've experienced. So that's a relatively new position that we've created. And I will tell you, it's going to pay dividends because we're out there, we're checking on them, and they know that we care about them, and we can flag, or we can be alerted if something is going on with that officer because of something that he has witnessed.
Yeah, very, very good. I'll just tell you my own experiences as has been the dean of students, the disciplinarian for over 1,000 boys. And there were some of them who had multiple incidents, but they were all minor, but that they would trigger then a review. But then there would be others who would have 1 or 2 serious incidents that would also trigger a review. But you needed to have those, as it were, those trip lines that would send a signal to get attention, because sometimes a kid could just go underneath the radar and you not really pay attention because it's few and far between, or it's minor things, but in fact it always says something is going on there. It has to be addressed. At the same time, you can't overlook the personal relationship of the supervisor with the officer to have that kind of intuitive sense that something is up as well, because it may not manifest in an incident. And so it's got to be both and. So I think that's really helpful. I'm glad to hear about that. I would recommend when we come out of the task force and again come back to the report to the commission and administration, a description of this system and how that is an important piece, as well as body cams and dash cams, an important piece in, again, caring for our officers and caring for our community through our officers, and describing how those parameters were set.
Before we move on, I want to also interject that there are persons that are watching via live streaming and on our website. If you have questions, the best way to have those addressed is to email us at CPR Task Force at wycokck.org. CPR Task Force, all one word, at wycokck.org. Those questions and comments will come directly to us. Also, you can go to the UG website as well and go into the portal and begin to enter in your opinions and or your particular incidents that you had with law enforcement here in Wyandotte County specifically. I just want to make sure we interject that because I do see some hands up of those that are watching.
Commissioner and Mayor, this is Evelyn. I have another comment/question for both Sheriff Ash and Captain York. I'm really grateful for the work that the police department and sheriff's department are doing, and most of the stats that we are looking at are from 2015 up to 2020. And one of the comments that were made was excellent, which was once we get the body cams in, that's going to help a lot. And this is a whole new system that's going online, and all that's going to help a lot. But our community is concerned about what has happened in some cases in 2014 or beyond, and has left a bad taste in their mouth, or it has infringed on their families' welfare. So I just would wonder, how do you navigate that situation from families that are very distraught, do not have a good relationship with the police department, maybe that was not done during this time span?
Well, Dr. Hill, I would just say that, we're listening, and that's why we're here. I'm hoping these stories come out and we can talk about them and fix some of the issues that are currently going on inside the community. And so, the body-worn camera is a big piece. I believe that's going to really open the door when it comes to transparency on what we do day in and day out. And I will tell you, I'm excited for them to come in because it's going to show that, you know, we do it right. So that's, you know, that's, I guess, what the task force is all about, is getting these stories out. And so we can talk about it and fix any problems that we have out there.
And I'd just add to that, Dr. Hill, by saying, you know, we've had these reporting mechanisms, we've had complaint mechanisms, we have diligently investigated every complaint that we have received. We have had cameras. We have had in-car cameras and body cameras in the sheriff's office now for just about 5 years. And so within that, we have a process that requires commanders periodically auditing or spot checking video. So when a video happens, and for example, there's a use of force or an arrest or some encounter we're concerned about, we make our reports. The deputies, the supervisors, the commanders flag those things. We pull those videos and we keep them for, you know, further review if we believe there may be possible litigation or whatever. So we archive those, if you will. Outside of that, our policy requires that we are spot checking videos. We're just going on and auditing videos from each officer, from each patrol vehicle, different times of the day or evening or whatever. So we're spot checking to see if we encounter anything or come across anything that causes us concern. I can share with you that in both the police department and the sheriff's office, we've run across on occasion videos like that where we've had maybe somebody is driving the car inappropriately, you know, but it might put us at increased liability. So, you know, we've dealt with those issues and we've diligently investigated any and all complaints, you know, that have come in. In my case, here in the sheriff's office, I and or my staff, we've uncovered things ourselves, just hearing about something that might not have been right, or somebody reported that they saw or heard something. In fact, you called me one time about one of those incidents and we dug into it and we got all of the details, you know, involved in it, which I, you know, reported back to you. And so we've continued to revise the policies. We've continued to strengthen them. We've continued to seek other ways that we can be better yet. For example, the IA Pro, we are implementing that here as well, but it doesn't mean we weren't looking at it from the standpoint of commanders watching for multiple complaints on a given officer or officers that we might have, you know, concerns about. And a lot of it is, I think, where we may have failed, if you will, in really educating the public, edifying the public so that they clearly know, you know, and understand. Early in the chief's presentation, he talked about arrests and affecting arrests. That's not a police rule. There's actually a state statute, KSA 21-5227, that says to law enforcement that a deputy or an officer is justifies in the use of any force he or she reasonably believes to be necessary to both effect the arrest and also to defend him or herself or another from bodily harm while making that arrest. So that statute says to us, we don't have to back off. De-escalation programs tell us, well, sometimes we might want to back off. Sometimes it might be important, you know, to back off or do that. But if the situation is serious enough, the crime is serious enough, probable cause to make that arrest, we also do not have to shrink from that, if you will, and are authorized to use the force necessary. That comes from state law. That's not the police department's rule. That's not the sheriff's office's rule. That comes from state law. And so we all need to do a better job informing and educating our public about what our role is, truly is, and we could do better with our citizens academies. I know the police department offers them. We offer them, and community could maybe do a little bit better job signing up and coming and finding out about some of those things as well. And we're happy to share that information.
Can I ask some questions? I didn't
Please,
I just want to
please.
make sure he was done. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
I think one of these obviously very seldom is lethal force or even this intermediate weapon used is such a small percentage, which is good. But what we're hearing in some of the reports we're getting as a task force and some of the things that are in the press is that officers in the past either have used the threats of force or the threats of arrest of the person or their loved ones to be coercive and exploitative. What are we doing to ensure that that doesn't happen? And if it does happen, that the quote unquote blue wall of silence doesn't allow it to continue. That seems to be the concern of many in the public that we're hearing from and those who report. So that's, I have a follow up on a different topic, but I want to start with that because that seems to be a great concern in our community that that in that sense, a police officer can go rogue and get away with it.
So Monsignor, I mean, are you asking that if an officer would tell someone, hey, if you don't do this, I'm going to arrest you, or I'm gonna arrest your family member if you don't cooperate with?
That's some of the accusations we're hearing that has happened in the past.
Yeah, I mean, again, the mechanism that would be in place would be if that person feels like the officer was abusing his power by saying those things, that his recourse would be the internal affairs unit. And we would look into that, investigate it, and see exactly what happened with that particular scenario. And then if the officer did abuse his power, yes, he would be disciplined accordingly. I mean, that's kind of my response to that. I would think some officers have told people, hey, stop doing what you're doing, or I'm gonna have to arrest you. I mean, that stops people from doing criminal behavior or about to do criminal behavior. If you don't stop doing what you're doing, we're going to have to arrest you. So I'm sure as one can be, that happens quite often. To avoid, that's kind of like a de-escalation technique, in my opinion. It'd be to avoid having to arrest somebody, letting that person know what you're doing or about ready to do is going to be a crime. So please don't do that, or I will be forced to arrest you.
And you don't think there's anybody currently, of course, that would misuse their position to coerce people or exploit people?
I'm saying, could that happen? Yes, it could happen. If you're saying it's happening, then somewhere, somehow down the road, that person has been a victim of an officer abusing his power. I don't want to argue that piece.
The public would have to report to the police on the police. Is that the best way, do you think? Or the DA suggested that we have a separate mechanism out of his office. Is there a better way? I mean, quite frankly, I'm a clergy and we had to deal with this question because, you know, it's human nature sometimes not to be as hard on one's friends as one might be on someone you don't know. And that's what we have to break through that to say, a crime's a crime, a abuse of power is abuse of power. That's got to be reported.
I would say, Monsignor, there's different avenues for the public to go to. There's the AG's office, and the FBI has also investigated our officers in the past for abuse of power. So there's more than just two mechanisms with our IA and Mr. Dupree's IA. There's other places where people can go to make complaints against police officers.
Right.
KBI will look at it.
Right.
FBI.
I am as a clergy member, and some of the other members on this are clergy, as well as their other positions. We're mandatory reporters for certain things, certain crimes, by state and sometimes by federal law. Are police mandatory reporters on other police if they are abusing their power?
Yes. Our policy, our code of ethics specifically lines that out, where if an officer sees any type of misconduct, he has a duty and an obligation to report that.
Thank you. I think that's one of the elephants in the room that we've got to talk about because of historical problems in this area, not just locally, but nationally. On a different subject, when it comes to use of force, we've seen a lot of use of force, even here on the plaza, but I'm a Naval Academy grad, and my fellow Academy grad, Christopher David, in Portland, said some things to the federal officers that they must not have liked, and they came and they just beat him with the baton. They never arrested him. They never, as far as I could tell, he wasn't doing anything illegal. Broke his hand, and it was all recorded. We all saw it. I don't understand right now the national use of force to clear spaces of protesters, especially the use of indiscriminate chemical weapons like tear gas or direct pepper spray on people if they're exercising their First Amendment rights of protest. That seems to me to be highly problematic. I know I couldn't have done that as a naval officer. I would have been court-martialed. So, someone's got to explain to me the thinking going into what we're seeing almost nightly on the press, on the television, excuse me, when it comes to dealing with protests.
Yeah, Monsignor, I don't know their force continuum when it comes to the federal agents and what is going on in Portland. We've talked about this in the past when it comes to a protest in Kansas City, Kansas. A peaceful protest is exactly that, and there will be no, force used. The only time that I would give the okay to do those things you're describing is if that protest has become violent and they're committing crimes against property and against our officers. That's the only time that should be allowed. But that's my opinion. I don't know what the federal government and their force continuum looks like.
Thank you.
Okay, Chief, continue.
Okay, so I only have one more slide, then I'm gonna have Major Sims take over. These are just the numbers that I'm providing when it comes to our use of intermediate weapons. As you can see, the baton is very rarely used, 3 times for all of 2019, that and the OC spray. The taser is probably the most widely used. It gives the officer the ability to distance themselves and so they will not become injured. So the taser has been but it's only been used 11 times in 19. So it's been probably the most successful intermediate weapon that we have currently, just because it allows the officer to gather or to distance himself from a person who is trying to assault them. I will also tell you the taser has been very helpful when it comes to suicide by cop. We've had multiple incidents over the years where a subject is trying to harm himself and he wants the officer to, basically a suicide by cop. So by the use of the taser, we are able to get that person to drop the knife, to drop the gun, to drop whatever weapon he has or she has, and then we're able to take them into custody without having to take their life. So the taser is a good tool that we've utilized, and it has in the past saved officers from using deadly force. That is all I have. I'm going to give it to Major Sims. Go ahead, George.
Can you guys hear me okay? Coming across all right?
Yes, we can. We can hear you just fine.
Okay, can you turn the volume up a little bit, Major, if you can?
Not sure what I have.
or get closer to your computer.
Okay. Moving on to some of the training that we do at the police department. We train our recruits, obviously, after they're hired. We put them through a basic defensive tactics and arrest control block. While they're in the academy, we revisit use of force training annually. We take people back to training as a result of anything in the review process. That's something that we kind of touched on moving into this. You know, we might have a year where we have nobody walk into internal affairs and complain about a use of force, but we might catch something on review and call them in, do an investigation and see whether there's remedial training that they would, that we need to visit with that officer. Or it may result from a complaint. A lot of times it's something that we catch. And we've got another program that we're kind of getting off the ground this fall, which is to simply let officers sign up for areas related to use of force that they have an interest in, so they can come in and work on their skills and do more development like that. Breaking those down a little bit more. The first block that they get in the academy is a basic defensive tactics course. We'll go into those topics in detail in a moment. We spend 2 weeks on that. They get approximately 2 weeks of range training. In addition, it's very basic. After that, we'll have what's called an officer survival week, which is kind of putting some of this stuff together. We do a 4-hour block on crowd control, which is where we teach them and we practice a lot of things related to the field force, probably speaking to some of the training and leadership and event management issues that the Monsignor was inquiring about. And then we bring them back in for a refresher segment of firearms before we put them in the field on their own. So altogether, this isn't all 100% use of force training, but of these blocks that include use of force training, there's about 212 hours at the academy that we spend. If you could advance the slide, please. Okay, so we begin in the classroom, kind of an education component as you'd expect. Prior to starting the academy, I think most recruits, just like most people, get their information about human interaction and use of force and arrest from the television or movies, which isn't particularly useful. We begin by talking about a lot of things like the effects of stress on their body, on their capabilities, their ability to think and so on, the effects of cortisol and adrenaline and things like that. And your ability to make decisions under that environment, your ability to see what kind of motor skills become improved and which ones begin to kind of break down. We start framing things through what we call the components of acceptability. Again, kind of hanging a decision-making framework, putting that in place. Is it legal? Looking at the applicable court decisions, the state laws, things of that nature. We look at the medical background for all the techniques that we do, because we need to know if a suspect or a person is doing something, what's the likely harm, medical harm that could result. And then importantly, if we're going to be proportional in our response, reasonable in our response, we need to know what medical harms may or may not result from any technique that we use. Finally, the tactical component of acceptability is simply to say, does it fit our work domain? We need to make sure that we're doing techniques that are effective and simple and correct for the environment. And we need to know that we're dealing with the types of resistance that we truly encounter by looking at reports, mining through that data, and determining what kinds of problems we have to deal with. And that, again, gives us the opportunity to figure out the best kinds of solutions to deal with those. The force continuum, we're actually I got a slide just for that we'll walk through here in a little bit. I again, I think a lot of the questions that have been asked kind of speak to that. And so we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Control principles is a thinking tool, again, on the academic side, because we teach the mind. Later on, we have to kind of train the body to make decisions as well. But the control principles is when I say that word, I basically mean once we decide that we need to bring somebody into an arrest situation and we start talking about the mechanics of arrest, what are we going to do? We look at tools that may cause pain compliance, make them decide to go along because of stimulus pain. We look at balance displacement, which is if we have somebody resisting and we need to put them in a prone position to facilitate handcuffing, we would use some kind of leverage to displace their balance and cause them to go to that kind of grounded position. Motor dysfunction. So we use techniques that would say weaken a leg by striking a thigh, for instance, kind of basically cause a Charlie horse. Distraction by, again, just if this pace is too fast or too slow, or you have questions, just let me know. But a distraction would be like if somebody, we wanted to bring their arms behind their back, and that's difficult if they're very strong because they're paying attention to their arms. We can use some kind of technique, like for instance, a strike to the thigh that would cause their attention to go elsewhere, weakening their arms, and would let us be able to put them into handcuffs. And balance, and stunning. Finally, would be something that we use primarily in a defensive mode, where we strike somebody in a way that kind of causes them 3 to 5 seconds of foggy headedness, for lack of a better word. We kind of overstimulate them with some sensory input that's kind of sudden, intense, and unexpected. That's our control principles. Legal requirements are obviously something that we drill pretty hard. We talk about the criminal side. One of the first things that we deal with on any call, not just something that may entail a use of force, is the law as it pertains to, can I be standing in this spot? Can I tell this person stop? And so on. And then more so when we get into the use of force, what does the law require of us? What can we detain for? Can I use force to detain someone when they're not under arrest, and under what circumstances? And also on the legal side, we talk about civil liability, how an officer can be sued personally, how the department can be sued because of a bad decision on an officer's part, and what effect that has on the police department, as well as the police department's reputation in the community, and the ability of other officers to be able to get cooperation from suspects when you're seeing something like the Christopher David's arrest on the news. It kind of makes things difficult for everyone when you have to deal with an actual or perceived incorrect use of force or illegal use of force by a police officer, regardless of where they are in the country. Ethics, in a nutshell, we spend a lot of time talking about what we can do, but we also spend time talking about just because I can do something, is that the best idea? Just because I can do something, should I do it? Which speaks to what Sheriff Ash said about the law says, that we're under no circumstances obligated to retreat. However, there are times that, without using the retreat language, there are times when it's smart to approach things in a different way other than head on. And we teach them other tools that they can use to arrest somebody or to follow up on an investigation and so on, if the situation permits it, and if it seems like the smarter tack to take at the time. And use of force for non-criminal situations, which we do, we teach it to them. We also scenario that for them as well, which primarily is going to apply to those situations for the police department, where we have somebody who is in some kind of a mental crisis and we need to use force to keep them from hurting themselves. And it's a special niche for us when we are teaching, because the rules for dealing with somebody who is a threat to themselves, if we're using force on somebody to help them, we have to do it in a different way than we would if we were arresting that person. And so we emphasize that we're not going to hurt someone, harm someone. We may cause them pain, don't get me wrong, but we're not going to cause someone injury to get them to a doctor. That wouldn't make sense. And again, it feeds back into legal because a lot of people, and I've had this in citizen contacts, police contacts as well, where they become frustrated because they're dealing with some adult who has adequate mental capacity, normal mental capacity, who's declining medical assistance. And in a situation like that, we couldn't compel them. But obviously, if they were in a mental crisis and they lack that capacity, then we can coerce them to get help. Usually we don't have to use force to do that, but sometimes it does happen. Please advance the slides. Here's an overview of the topics that we cover in Recruit Basic. I'll unpack this a little bit. Most of it speaks for itself, some of it not so much. Handcuffing and restraints. We go through two basic handcuffing systems that we use. I mean, we put probably in the ballpark, we have the numbers of 5,000 to 6,000 people in jail last year. We probably handcuffed another 2,000 to 2,500 on top of that. And we need to make sure that we're doing it effectively and safely for us and for the person that we're handcuffing. We also teach officers to use flex cuffs. We teach them to use leg restraints for people that are kicking. We teach them during this part to do searches and do basically, I guess what you'd call a hasty threat analysis of a person, so you could determine risk if somebody should be placed in a kneeling or prone position before you even approach them, to place them in handcuffs or some kind of restraint. We also teach them how to use leg restraints properly. And when we're talking about it, the prone positioning, whether it's somebody who's been placed there, say if we've stopped a stolen car that was taken in a robbery, and so we don't go up to the car, we call people out and have them lie down, kind of give you that much situation. Once we have somebody in handcuffs, our officers are trained to immediately move them off of their stomach, just an abundance of caution to make sure that they're in a safer position where they're able to breathe best. When we do prone positioning, whether we've grounded somebody or whether we've just told them to get in a ground position, we will use body weight at the shoulder, but we are not doing anything where we're standing, kneeling, or doing anything around the person's neck at all. And we generally don't, we prefer to teach them to use the shoulder, not over the lower back, which also puts additional pressure on the abdomen, which for some people may cause some breathing difficulties. You know what I mean if you experiment with it a little bit. So we take a lot of, it sounds so simple. Everybody's seen handcuffs and you think you just toss them and put them on, but there's a lot of method that goes to that. Pressure points is generally the next thing that we take on. Give you some examples. Pressure points may be used by touch. If it's something like, for instance, we want to use pain to cause somebody to let go of something, or move your hand behind your back, and they're not doing anything that you would call aggressive, or they're not pulling away or pushing you off or doing anything of that nature. You have somebody that is basically just saying no. And then you go to use strength to, for instance, to pull their arm behind their back, guide their arms behind their back, and you're not getting there, then we might use touch pressure points to cause pain compliance. The other way that pressure points would apply is we have nerve motor points and pressure points that we would strike instead of touch. We strike pressure points defensively to cause stunning. And we also, you very commonly see officers use the thigh as a pressure point or a nerve motor point to cause distraction or motor dysfunction. And that's our principal target for all of our leg strikes and all of our baton strikes and things like that. Joint locks and takedowns. If you have somebody who's resisting, we will almost always handcuff them on the ground. We have to have a way to do that that's that's less likely to cause harm to them and be safe for us. And so, obviously we're not going to wrap somebody up and tackle them. We live in a world of pavement and broken glass and bottles and bricks and things like that. So, you know, scooping people up and dumping them on their backs, for instance, like you see in sports, is not going to go. Our primary takedowns are using either a wrist lock or an arm bar or a drag of the arm, something of that nature to bring the person to a prone position so that we can handcuff them. That's our goal. Handcuff them, roll them off their stomach, and then go on with our business. Soft baton techniques. Again, these are techniques that we use for low-level resistors, people who are more passive or lightly trying to escape or pull away, things of that nature. Maybe somebody who has their arms locked up against their chest. We use soft baton to do pressure point control. So it's a pain compliance technique. The other thing that we use soft baton for is for escorts and to pry the arms off of the, you know, if somebody's on their stomach and has their arm in a front position, it's difficult to bring those arms around the back, and that baton can be used as a pry tool to get that done without a lot of pain or risk of injury. Defense, counter strikes. We do teach punching and kicking. Punching and kicking is generally something that we teach for officers to do when they're under attack in close quarters. When an officer's being attacked, and by attack I'm referring to kicking and punching and things of that nature, maybe somebody reaching in to bite you, headbutt you. I'm not talking about spitting and things of that nature. I'm talking about, you know, hard physical attacks. Under those circumstances, officers are trained to, you know, create a 6-foot gap or so, and probably, depending on relative size and condition of the people involved, transition to a baton or OC or something of that nature. But our counter strikes are generally used to create that pause and create that space. So these will be strikes to the torso or leg strikes to or kicks to the legs. The shoulder pin is something that we're reserving for lethal force right now. And a shoulder pin is a lock of the head, neck, and arm. It's difficult to show with one person, but if you can imagine, you know, we've all seen strangles, which are forbidden. I don't think there's anybody in law enforcement that teaches anything to do with those, even in lethal force. But then everybody's probably seen the neck restraints where they V the neck in and apply lateral pressure to the neck.
Major?
Yes.
I don't know how many slides you have left, but we are, you know, generally stop at 6, and I know there'll be some questions. I think you don't need to go through each one of these specific training. I think what I'm gathering from this is there's a whole range of options that are available to police officers and they're trained in. And would you speak just generally to the, you know, because again, when adrenaline kicks in, you know, stressors kick in and you're into it, it would seem to me, at least for me, in that situation, it would become very personal to me. So, you know, psychologically, what's the nature of the training in helping the law enforcement to remain kind of in the right space, if that makes sense?
Yes. Yes. So we did this, and we break it into like things that we're dealing with low levels of force, defending ourselves, and then where we have to defend ourselves all the way up to lethal force. Can we go ahead and I want to speak to the mayor's question. So can we go to the next slide, and then we'll come back if that is okay with everyone. It sounds like I need to step up my pace a little. Decision making. It's easy when you're sitting in a chair in an office and you watch a video and say, oh my gosh, I wouldn't do that. And when we're under stress, sometimes people tend to overreact, underreact, or react not at all. So early on, we start out teaching them the force continuum, which is a very basic continuum. We give them examples to go along with each step, and we discuss it. That's just, again, sitting in the classroom cold like we are now. Then we'll start running them through scenarios. Some of them are made up where we'll manipulate the facts. Some of them will be from real life, especially since there's so much police video now we can go off of, and we'll pose it to them as a question, working off the videos, and we'll discuss it like that. So again, we always come back and we revisit, okay, look at this, and we give them context and say, what do you see? Is it a go? Is it no go? What do we need to do differently? What can we do differently? And again, that's all in the discussion phase. On the floor where we're working and getting all sweaty and stuff, we do stimulus response thing. It's not enough to kind of like tell them what they should think and how they should respond to things. We give them a physical picture. So we will have them on the floor where they will be responding to somebody who is pulling away. They will be responding to somebody who's lying on their hands, lying on the ground, kicking at them, punching at them, grabbing them, and so on. And again, all of this is, you teach the brain to make a decision. Now we got to teach the body. And then finally, once they've gotten a lot of material to chew on and think through pathways in their head, and their body's kind of tuned up that when it sees something coming at them, I can respond to it. We put them in scenarios where we can test their decision making as well as their basic skill sets they should have developed at that point. Does that speak to your question, sir?
Yes, thank you. I think that's, again, it would seem that it's just like, football players trying to teach a defensive lineman when can you actually tackle the quarterback and when can you not. And it's such a split second kind of thing. You have to go through so many practice scenarios. Like you said, train the body. It's got to get into the bones. That must be extremely difficult.
It's very difficult. I mean, to kind of go with the sports we'll sometimes have less than a second, a few seconds, depending on what the problem is, to make a forced decision, for instance. And if you can imagine, if you had a team of people that played softball and you had somebody that never came to practice, would you put them in the game? And in our case, we have people that, we turn them out of the academy after 4 months and they might have to play the World Series the next day. So yeah, we work hard and struggle to kind of keep them in that place, because we don't get in trouble most of the time because we hit someone incorrectly. It's not a skill set issue, it's a decision-making issue. And so we need to make sure that we're turning out people that are making good decisions. That's a priority. Can we go back to the last slide? I'll just pop it up there so you can, again, speaking for itself primarily, gives you an idea of levels, and it's a teaching tool. And it's a thinking tool. It gives them something that they can work on and visualize, starting from somebody who is making psychological intimidation. Perhaps they're just looking at you in an aggressive way, and or a verbal non-compliant person says no, but that's not resistance, and a lot of those can be resolved without violence. However, once we start to move out of that, we deal with people who are passive, and then we deal with people who are pulling away, pushing away, wiping their arms off, things like that. And finally, people who attack us. And then finally, people who attack us with lethal force. And then this other side on our right, as we're looking at the screen, gives you an idea of how we're going to respond to that generally. There are always variables, but that kind of gives you a one-on-one example. Can we go ahead and forward to, if there are no questions? So in this age, we have a lot to cover in basics to teach recruits about handguns, patrol carbine, and shotguns. And again, for time's sake, I'll let this slide mostly speak for itself. I think the shotgun is there. I think the shotgun is starting to maybe sunset in law enforcement in America, but we still do it. And the last time I checked, it's still required by the state. And getting people up to a basic level of performance and challenging their decision making in 80 hours, it sounds like a lot of time. It's not. And the more competent we can make people, and the more confident they are realistically, the better decisions we normally we'll see. If there aren't any questions, we can advance this one as well. Field force training, we start out with a lot of talking about First Amendment rights, event management. We use the term event management because we have to deal with events that are not unlawful. We have to deal with events that are unlawful but that are not violent. Something like you'd see with a die-in on private property with the responsible person for that property doesn't want to allow it, or people blocking a highway. And then all the way up to a crowd that has a very violent dynamic going on. And we have to be able to make decisions again and deal with the full range of potential people ranging from an ordinary protest, civil disobedience, up to people burning cars or whatever, breaking windows. And then a lot of times teaching officers not to, you have a crowd of people that's behaving themselves, doing what they're supposed to do. We're standing there doing what we're supposed to do, and somebody starts throwing bottles. Can we isolate that person or that group so that we're not basically pushing the whole crowd or throwing tear gas, to use the example from earlier. So we try to isolate and arrest under those circumstances. At a point, they spend a week with our special operations people doing role play. And again, it's challenging their decision-making and basic skills. And they unpack everything to the point, we started with us standing 3 feet from each other and me saying, I'm going to throw a punch at your face and you're going to do this. Well, now they get dispatched to a location, they're given basic information, they respond, and they handle everything from beginning to end. Obviously, during this time period, not everything's a use of force, but they are challenging scenarios. This is also where they learn to search buildings and respond to active shooters. Every year, we cover these topics: policy, legal, continuum, shoulder pin. These are all required by the state or by CALEA or some other authority. Go ahead and change the slide. And then that gives us some time to work on other skills or other challenges, other problems. And these are the things that we often select from.
Thank you, Major. Sheriff Ash?
Okay.
And then for any questions, Major, if you can stay on, if there are any questions from the task force, we'll pick them up. And I will say this to those who are viewing in, that when you send questions, we send those to the presenters who will prepare answers and is available to the public to have time to respond. We don't really have time during the task force meetings to answer these questions. They are taken in though and provided to the presenters, and those questions are answered and will be sent back. Thank you.
You want me to run through this, Mayor?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I would very quickly just say our program of policy and training mirrors very closely that of the police department. But there are some things that are unique to the sheriff's office. For example, the jail, which is where by far the majority of our use of force incidents occur. Between 98 and 99% of our use of force reports, our use of force incidents occur in the jail, and 2/3 of those occur in intake. And so context is important, and I just have 6 slides that I'm going to go through very, very quickly. So listen fast, okay? This gives you an idea of bookings. 2018, I've got 2 years of data I'm going to show you, 18 and 19. And of course, this slide shows you some other years. And you can see how the bookings have declined pretty much over the year. But the last couple of years, we've settled in at a little over 9,000 bookings. So 2018, 9,281. Next slide, please. This is 2019. You can see we're right there again, 9,439. And you can see the chart, how it's sort of come down, and we've kind of basically leveled off from about 2016, moving forward. Okay, next slide. So our use of forces then in 2018, 267. So that math very simply, if you'll trust me, equates to in about 2.8% of the incidents where we were involved in booking or handling arrestees or whatever, even if it started in the field and we came in, only about 2.8% where we use force. Next slide, please. And it went down, as you can see there, in 2019 to 245. So that, if my math is correct, is about only 2.6% of those contacts result in use of force. I'm sorry, I thought I had that phone turned off. All right, so here's the force basically that we use. And you will see we have one very glaring departure from a tool or a technique that we use that the police department does not have, and that is the chair. The chair is a restraint chair. You can see that, you know, in this year, 2018, that was clearly half of our defensive actions or use of force were putting combative people in the restraint chair. This gives them an opportunity to calm down and become more compliant. So they're handcuffed behind their back, they're put into the chair. The chair is designed to accommodate that. Their legs are strapped so that they can't kick, and they're secured in their torso so that they can't wrangle and wrestle out of there, in their waist. And every time somebody's put in the chair, we have a nurse from our medical team that checks the straps to be sure they're properly applied and they are not too tight. We get into then PPCT. Those are a lot of the things that Major Sims talked about there, those various techniques that we use, all of those. And then we have a certain percent of the taser where we actually use a taser, and a smaller percentage yet of OC. That's for 2018. Now show us 2019, please. Okay, I don't know what happened to the rest of the data, but you can see there that for what you can see there, it's very, very similar. It's very, very close. So I would just tell you that in the 11 plus years that I have been here, we have not applied any force. We have had a few instances of active pointing, and I think the chief and Major Sims did a good job explaining active pointing. We have not had situations where we have discharged our weapons in the performance of our duty or affecting any arrest, and we have not had any deaths as a result of any defensive action or use of force that we have conducted in the performance of our duties. I've talked to some people around the sheriff's office who have been here a lot longer than me, some as close to 30 years or so. They could not tell me the last time there was a use of force from someone in the sheriff's office that resulted in a death. I'm sure it's happened sometime, some point in time over time, but I was not able to identify it. And I'm going to stop right there so that we can get to the questions.
Any questions from any of the task force members to either the sheriff or to chief or major?
I have a question, and I don't know if it would be one of the chief or sheriff or maybe even Gordon, but where are we on the contract negotiations with the FOP? Where are we on that?
The FOP.
Go ahead, Chief.
Can you hear me? Reverend
Yeah,
Carter?
I can now.
Oh, okay. So the contract was, if you're asking me where we're at with the contract?
Right, the negotiations with FOP.
Yeah, it's been signed. It was signed this year.
Okay, so where we are with
It's a 3-year contract.
where we are with FOP 40, Pastor Carter, is we were at the point of acceptance. The contract had been agreed to in principle and so forth. The FOP negotiating committee had accepted it. Their executive committee had accepted it and was ready to move it forward for ratification to their membership. And then COVID hit, and then the revenue shortfall was being experienced, and it was pulled back off of the table. So it is yet to be finalized, but at least for where they were at that point in time, it was agreed upon and ready to be ratified. Their leadership was confident that their members would accept it.
Thank you.
Any other
This is
questions?
Evelyn.
Go ahead,
Oops.
Doctor.
Okay. To Major Sims and, well, I'll start with Major Sims. You mentioned the hours for basic use force training and all the other different types of basic use training for your cadets and for the new staff. And then at the very end, you mentioned annually, everybody has to go back and do some training. And so my question is, how do you help individuals who were taught back 20, 25 years ago? How do you help them transition to this new policing policies that you have in place now? For instance, I don't think you mentioned how many hours they have to have this annual training. I don't think you mentioned how many hours, but I just wonder if somebody was trained one way 25 years ago and they were a strong personality that didn't believe in change, how do you help them transition to this new training methods?
We work hard at it. It's not easy. We don't have a set number of hours that we spend revisiting this every year. It varies. There are certain topics that we have to hit every year, and some that they give us extra time to work on. For we're all kind of competing for time during annual training because it's 40 hours, and a lot of us want part of that time to spend with our officers. Yes, whenever we've had an update to anything from our core training, we teach them. We bring everybody in, we have them do it with us, and we explain to them why. The good news is that the core training and the basic decision-making model that we've been using has been the same. I don't think there's anybody on the police department currently that didn't go through the same basic model.
I have a question. So earlier you all spoke about the body cams and how it should crack down on a lot of the discrepancies about the way things are. So what happens? What's the secondary if the body cam malfunctions and someone needs, I guess, to report that? What is your secondary mode of action when the body cam isn't functioning properly?
Curtis, I believe the secondary would be the in-car camera as well. So we have a brand new system where it's coming online the next couple months where the in-car camera system syncs with the body-worn camera. So when you have a fight, let's say for an example, and the body-worn camera gets knocked off, well then it's no longer, it's no longer operating, it's no longer recording. The in-car camera would still be recording the interaction.
I have a question too, and I'm not sure who would it be, but let's say that there was an incident where use of force was used, and it's reported, there's a complaint and so forth, or excessive force is that footage from that body cam available to the public? And if so, when does it become available? If it does.
Well, I can tell you this, if it's considered evidence, it would not be available to the public. But there are, and I'll have to look at the policy again. I don't have it off the top of my head, but will be instances where people that go to internal affairs, and we do have body worn camera footage, that they can view it. So there's going to be a whole lot of body worn camera footage, thousands upon thousands of hours. So we're going to have to, redact a lot of that information. And then, from there, follow the policy when it comes to when we can and cannot release the video. And I'll get you specific information on that. I just don't have it at my fingertips right now as to when you can review body worn camera footage.
Yeah, Yarrow, there's some stuff set out in statute, but as the chief said, to take it a little bit further, if it's evidence, it's not available to the public at least until it's entered into the public record. So for example, if it's evidence in a case and it goes to court and, the video is introduced in there, becomes a part of the public record or whatever, then it becomes subject to release, I believe, under KORA, Kansas Open Records Act or whatnot. And then like Chief said, there are many times when maybe somebody's made a complaint on attitude and conduct or whatever. And I know I have on a few occasions, at least, we've had a complainant come in once we've completed our investigation. The investigation's been determined to be, not sustained or maybe flat unfounded. And we brought complainants in and showed them the video. And usually they thank us and tell us they will take care of it from there, especially if it involves a minor child, and then we never hear any more about it.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question related to that question? I know everybody know, here we go with Father Sweatland with the elephant in the room. The fact that we withhold that information, you guys know that's going to appear that we're not being transparent. And I'm not saying that's the case. And I understand there are statutes that govern that and guide all of that. But it seems to me that that's part of the core issue for us, is there has to be some things that we can do differently that puts us in a better light. And I don't know if that's one of them. Again, I'm not arguing the point. I know that there are rules as relates to when and so forth and all of that, but that's one of the core issues, I believe, that if we're ever going to come up with substantive change, that's one of the issues that we're going to have to look at with a different eye so that we can get to the heart of the matter.
So, hey,
I just
Reverend,
thought that needed to be said.
I just want to comment on that. I mean, that's, absolutely, that's a valid point. So the rules of evidence, they are what they are. But I think if we work in concert with the district attorney's office, and there are bits and pieces that we can release, it doesn't compromise the case and doesn't compromise the victim. I mean, yeah, I think you're right. I think you're on the right track when it comes to, that's what the people want. They want complete transparency. And, I think we can accomplish some of that by working with the DA's office.
Yeah, Pastor.
And I agree with that. I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying that as we move forward, our ability to build trust is going to be to some degree determined by our willingness to at least look at and consider that maybe there could be a different approach.
I think I want to echo what the chief said. In some cases, the law is going to have to change, and that's not necessarily us, although we might be a part of that. Certainly could, but for example, in our policy, we are working with and adding a use of force review board that would be comprised of, some people within our agency and somebody that is one of our use of force coordinators, if you will, sort of a subject matter expert like Major Sims. It would include, in our case, people from in our agency. I might ask Chief York if Major Sims could be a part of that, since he is a subject matter expert, or someone from another law enforcement agency who really has no ties to any of our people or whatever. We could think about including somebody from the district attorney's office on that as a part of this review board, which would give us a little more outside access, if you will, outside transparency, or somebody from the Law Enforcement Advisory Board, Pastor Carter, Chairperson Carter, all right, which gives us a citizen and somebody, from out in the community that becomes a part of this use of force review board, which of course then they would have to be sure they're signing confidentiality agreements and so on and so forth. But we'll let you in and help us review it. Be with us as we review it so that we're looking at it, so that you can hear us say, well, that was inappropriate. That's a training issue, okay? That training director Sims, that's a training issue. That's a policy failure. Chief York, Sheriff Ash, you got to get your policy people on that in order to make that better. And so I think there are ways we can accomplish this together.
Thank you, Sheriff Ash and Chief York. I think, again, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for at least the willingness to have a discussion, and maybe that board you're talking about might be a better way of approaching that. But I think at least if we're going to represent the community, we have to be willing to look critically at some of the things that are already in place and perhaps look at maybe another way of approaching them. Thank you, Sheriff Ash and Chief York, for those were good answers.
I know we're running out of time, and I'm just going to be real quick, just a quick comment. I certainly appreciate the information that was shared on this evening, but I'm also concerned as a community person, why haven't we gotten more folks to come to the table in regards to sharing their stories or opinions?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Could it be yes, could it be that this is a platform maybe that they are not comfortable to participate in? So that's just a comment I wanted to throw out there. Thank you.
No, that's excellent question, and that's why I want to reach out to, and again, I put together an email that will be shared probably tomorrow with each of the task force members that we can send to the pastors in the community, other community leaders, community organizations, to say, if you know individuals who are telling these stories, we need them to come forward. And we do have an option if someone does not feel comfortable putting it in writing or sending a video, that they could schedule a time where a task force member would hear their story in person. And so we're trying to accommodate confidentiality, people's maybe their fear or their concerns that there be some kind of retribution if they come forward. We're trying to provide as many avenues as possible for folks to come forward with their stories. But I do think part of it is we're just got the website moving, trying to get this word out. I think we just got to communicate and advertise it a little bit. It's a common problem, frankly. I think in our community in the UG, we always complain that we don't have a newspaper that's a large circulation that everybody goes to. There's no one place where everybody goes to for their information. And so we put the information out, but sometimes people don't pick it up. And we've got to do it, I think, word of mouth in many ways. So, but I think that's a great question. I think for our next kind of logistics meeting for the task force, that's one of the questions we have to address. And so having said that, we're at 6:05. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I have one quick question, just for Chief York. It's going with, you mentioned that there's people who are auditing the videos, right, and looking at the footage, and they report if something needs to be filed. My question is, how many people, because that's a lot of hours of footage, how many people right now do you guys have auditing those videos? And if it's not enough people that you guys have, is there plans to hire more to accommodate, to make sure that all of that footage is being seen and reported accordingly if necessary?
So once the body worn cameras will be fully operational, we'll have one person doing random audits. So there's no way they can,
Yeah.
do thousands upon thousands of hours of video. So it'll be random audits. So in the budget for 2021, we'll have another one. So we'll have at least two people here just doing nothing but audits of the camera to make sure we are doing it right and we are following policy.
So Yareli, the way we do it at the sheriff's office is each shift or unit has a shift commander who is a captain, the captain at the captain's level. Each captain is responsible for those regular audit checks of the subordinates underneath them. And that is a smaller number, or that's a limited number. So for example, a shift in the jail that might have 20 deputies assigned to it, that captain's responsible for ordering that. Captain over in operations who may have 6 or 8 or 10 has fewer. So we break it out that way. We have 8 captains, so you can kind of do the math from there. Now, I have a major, I actually have 4 majors responsible for watching the captains, be sure that they're doing what they're doing. And when they don't, then we step in and we take some administrative action, some disciplinary action, if that's what's necessary, to be sure that everybody knows we're checking the front line and we're checking the checkers.
Really, just a couple things I want to add to what Sheriff Ash said. These 2 people will be civilians. They're not going to be police officers.
Okay, good.
So that's another piece. And secondly, yeah, currently we have in-car videos that we do monthly audits. What Sheriff Ash just described. That's basically how we do our in-car videos now. We have captains doing monthly audits.
Okay.
I just wanted to add that.
Oh, that's good. Thank you.
Yep.
See, Monsignor, I think you have a question, and then we'll call it quits after that.
Well, yeah, these are going to take, my questions are going to take us way too long. I mean, they're more philosophical, but we've got to address them at some stage. So I'm going to throw them out here now, but we'll talk about them perhaps in another meeting. Looking at some academic articles, it's clear that police in the United States kill far more people than do police in other advanced industrial democracies. That's just what the academic literature says. I'm actually quoting from a major article from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science that did the statistics. Why is that? We've got to address, why is it we have a lot more people getting killed by the police in the United States than other advanced industrial democracies? That's a bigger question. But a second part, and more to the point perhaps of this commission, is those studies also show that a substantial body of evidence shows that people of color, especially African Americans, are at a greater risk for experiencing criminal justice contact and police-involved harm than are whites. And I want to know why that is. As a nationwide, this is what the statistics show overwhelmingly. Why is that, and how can we change both of these realities so we don't have so many people dying at police hands, and definitely we don't see the disproportionate numbers of those being harmed in police encounters being people of color? So those are 2 philosophical questions way beyond what we have time for this evening, but I think we have to address those as part of our examination.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Monsignor, on that. And agree, again, like you said, we'll have to schedule some time before our next meeting to have those discussions.
Yeah, and the police here, the sheriff and police, they should, because their field, they should perhaps have important answers to those philosophical questions.
I agree. Well said. Mayor, I think that's all the questions that we have. I'll turn it back over to you, and we'll have final words.
Great. Again, I would just encourage anybody who is Zooming in to please go to the website, and if you have a story to tell or you know someone who has a story to tell, please encourage them to make use of one of the avenues to bring their story. And also, I would just thank again each member of the task force. If you presented, if you're public and you were Zooming in and watching, and you have a CPR task force at wicokck.org, those questions are received by every member of the task force, and those answers will be composed for you and sent out in response, and also be shared with all the task force. And again, I would encourage, so Monsignor, the articles, the studies that you are citing, please put those on the Teams site for us so that we can all look at them. Any kind of information that we can put forward and share amongst one another, I think really does sharpen the questions and sharpens our understanding. But thank you all. And have
Good night, everybody.
Good evening.
Good night.
Bye, everyone. Have a good night.
Good evening.